Anyways, guys, no more speculations about Borussia Dortmund. They have a new head coach. Matt, you were there. What did you think of Niko Kovac's first day at the office? I know it wasn't technically his first day at the office. His first week at the office, capped off with his first day on the touchline. Didn't go quite as planned, I would say.
His first day at the office, by all accounts, didn't go quite as planned. I
Okay.
think he arrived. There's been quite a good story doing the rounds in Germany this week that Niko Kovac and his brother Robert and his general team arrived at the training ground in Dortmund last Sunday at about 7:45 in the morning, and initially drove to the wrong entrance and had to be told by some of the waiting journalists and photographers that, well, first of all, can we get a few photos? Cheers, job done, go home early. And secondly, your entrance is a different road or a different section. So that got off to a good start. And then as for his first, yeah, it's been a bit of a whirlwind week. He had his unveiling press conference, I think on Tuesday or Wednesday, Tuesday, I think. Um, and it's a strange paradox, I think, that this move by Lasvik and Sebastian Kehl to bring in Niko Kovac is a move which has been sold as bringing in input from the outside, external input, to get away from this constant Borussia Dortmund circus of people who know the club, Edin Terzic, Nuri Sahin, ultimately all harking back to the big phantom of Jurgen Klopp in the background. Great, that sounds okay. Then what's the word which Niko Kovac uses most in his unveiling press conference, and the thing he's been talking about all week? Work, hard work, work mentality, attitude, all these same buzzwords which have been which get used around Borussia Dortmund, and which you sort of think that they play a role. They are all important in their own ways, but you do sort of think if you're going to bring in external import and new ideas to Dortmund, you have to make some progress in other areas of the game. Tactical innovations, a more professional or more up to date transfer policy, more modern scouting. Now, I think Stefan, you've discussed before that system of a lot of younger English, younger French players coming in is maybe had its day. Yeah, you're looking to move the club on in that way, and then you bring in Niko Kovac, who, okay, ticks the external box, but is then talking about all the sort of traits which you maybe would actually like try and get away from, or at least not be limited to. So that was a bit of a frustrating paradox for the first week. So that's before we even got into the game. Yeah, I wonder how you two saw that.
Well, he also brought in Robert Kovac, who played for the club, so Dortmund couldn't even get away from this.
That's true. Yeah, that is true. Yeah.
Yeah, Stefan, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think Matt makes a really good point. I, I'm still slightly underwhelmed by the Kovac appointment, to be perfectly honest with you. I mean, I know he technically isn't German by footballing standards, but he is German. He was born and raised in Germany. He speaks fluent German. Is Bundesliga through and through. So he's no different from I'm trying to think of any Bundesliga head coach that would embarrass him or insult him. First one that came to mind was actually Bruno Labbadia, bizarrely enough, but
You were
which is
definitely
maybe
going down the Bruno Labbadia, Andre Breitenreiter
exactly, yeah.
the
Hey,
standard
hey, hey, hey.
Bundesliga merry-go-round.
Breitenreiter's doing a
Well,
great job
exactly.
in Hannover.
Yes, yes.
I do think there's a very thin veil that separates him from that grouping of head coaches. He's still much younger, and look, he has had some success. Obviously, he did very well at Frankfurt, and I think he did okay at Bayern before it all kind of came tumbling down. And it just didn't really work out from at Wolfsburg at a time when Wolfsburg were in a complete mess on and off the pitch. Um, I I just kind of wonder if when is somebody going to kind of grasp the nettles, if you will, or confront the elephant in the room here, which is that it's not really about hard work per se. It's more about the fact that just players aren't good enough on the pitch. Benzabaini, for example, I thought was at fault for both those goals, and he's been a player who's dogged that Dortmund team forever, forever for much of the season. I know they've signed Svensson; he'll maybe step in eventually, and that'll make that change. But the fact, I think we were talking in the subscriber chat before the game about the fact that Pascal Gross had come back in the starting lineup and he was in midfield, and I was reading through the week about how Kovac was kind of trying to build up Adeyemi as this kind of solution on the wing, as if I mean, I guess he had technically been ignored by Terzic for the most part, but it's not as if Nuri Sahin didn't know who Karim Adeyemi was and wasn't trying desperately to get playing. I thought he had quite a good start to the season, to be honest, under Nuri Sahin. And then, of course, Emre Can is centre back. He made a big thing about that last week as well. So there's only so much you can polish a turd, I guess, is the crude way to say it, in the sense that, yeah, Niko Kovac can talk about hard work, but at the end of the day, they lost because Benzema still can't mark a man or still can't really pay attention to any fullbacks or players lingering behind him when a cross comes in. And Julian Brand is still going to sky a cross in the last kind of minutes of a game when they desperately need to get that into the box and things like that. I think that's ultimately what's... I just kind of wonder how much of that Kovac can actually fix between now and the end of the season. How much of that can he fix to the degree that he gets Dortmund back towards, a European spot? But Matt, you watched the game. I didn't get a chance to watch this game. Do you think there was anyone in that 11 that immediately looked better, or did you think the team looked better? Because in terms of stats, they probably should have taken something from this game, I suppose.
The one player, and you mentioned his name, I was surprised that he started. Now, I actually thought he played relatively well to a point, and that was Karim Adeyemi, particularly in the first half. I was actually, just before we started this, I just had a look at the ratings that Kicker had given him, and they'd given him a 5, which is obviously 5 out of 6 is the second bottom rating in German ratings. Which I thought was a little bit harsh. Now, admittedly, his final product was all over the place. There's at least 3 or 4, maybe even 5 moments in the first half where he picks the wrong pass just after half time as well. But he's got into the right positions, but he's either picked a pass where he should have shot or shot where he should have passed, which is obviously frustrating. But up until that point, he had arguably been Dortmund's most promising outlet down the right, and it was surprised that he even started because other reports that have been doing, and I say not reports, by all accounts, I've got no reason to doubt them. In the tunnel in the dressing room area in Heidenheim last week, so Mike Tulberg's final game as interim coach, Adeyemi was brought on at half time and then taken off after 86 minutes. Terrible performance. So he's that's a humiliation anyway, being brought on as a sub and being subbed off. I mean, that's not a good performance. And yet, after the game, Adeyemi spotted apparently outside the dressing room area and the mixed zone area in Heidenheim, laughing, joking, on his phone, without a care in the world. Now, you can read too much into things like that. The lad's entitled to be on his phone to whoever he wants, or whatever, but it's not a good look. It's not they're not professional optics. Combine that with a disciplinarian like Niko Kovac coming in, demanding hard work, the right mentality, and all that. I was absolutely surprised to see Karim Adeyemi's name in the starting lineup. I thought he'd be absolutely number 1 on Niko Kovac's list of targets to get out the door. Nevertheless, like I said, I do actually think he stepped up. There was also a moment, I think it was in the first half, where he comes chasing back really, really hard, and I think it was shoulder to shoulder with, I think, Angelo Stiller, midfielder, though, perhaps correct me on that. And it's a really, really good example of chasing back, working hard, good physical challenge to win the ball on the halfway line and regain possession for your team and realise another counter attack. So yeah, actually paradoxically impressed with Karim Adeyemi despite the lack of a final product. But then again, as Niko Kovac pointed out after the game, that wasn't just him that fell short on that level. Dortmund's decision-making was absolutely shocking across the board, and added to some, shocking defensive positioning, particularly for the first goal. Is the reason why they didn't get anything out of that game.
It's interesting that you mentioned that instance with Adeyemi, and it was Stiller.
Was it? Yeah.
Yeah, but 1 minute later, it was 2-0 Stuttgart. Chef Chabot. Julian Chabot scoring the second goal.
But that also happened again. Even the first goal came less than a minute after a brilliant little 1-2, I think, on the right wing between Adeyemi and Brandt, which puts Adeyemi into a great position on the right hand side of the box, and he's got options in the middle and just sort of spanks it wide somewhere. And then obviously Stuttgart break, and within about 50 seconds, it's 1-0.
What I thought? What
Sorry,
I
carry
thought,
on, Matthew. Okay.
yeah, what I thought was interesting too in this game is that, and you point out all these things, the hard work and Adeyemi's work and the importance of him, and I think it is really important for the club to get them going. But the other thing that kind of stood out to me, and this is one of those stories that only football right, is that the 2 goal scorers for Stuttgart were A, the guy that Stuttgart sold to Dortmund, and then B, the guy that Stuttgart bought to replace the guy that scored the first goal for Stuttgart in this game. And I mean, both of these goals too, Chabot, I mean, I had to watch this over and over again. He had enough space to land a 7-for-7 in that area.
He wasn't on his own. He had a Stuttgart teammate by him as well. It could have been 1 or 2 of them who came to that volley.
I found that wild. Like, yeah, it's the Bundesliga and defending, and Stefan, you point this out over and over again, it's not a prerogative for Bundesliga clubs, but come on. This is unbelievable. The space in that situation was just... There was acres of space.
Well, it's a classic case because it's originally come from a corner on the opposite side, so it's almost like the sort of the second attack, isn't it? The corner's been half cleared. And it's a classic case, the corner being half cleared, but then all the Dortmund players, it's completely amateurish defensive behaviour. So rather than hold your position and advance out in a well-held format, all dragged straight to the ball and leaving 2 men unmarked at the back post. Then comes in.
I used to coach 5-year-olds, super adorable. That's the sort of defending they would do.
Yeah.
If you watch the highlights,
proper headless chicken stuff.
Yeah.
If you watch the highlights, Matt's right. Obviously, it's like a second phase from a corner, and it's actually, I think the problem is that it's Gittins and Girassi who are at the back post, and it's the 2 of them who obviously bomb forward in the hope of a counter attack, and they leave those guys at the back. But the thing that I think is criminal is if you watch the lead up to that goal, Benzbaini looks behind him, he sees 3 guys behind him, and instead of trying to do anything about it, he just tucks into the closest guy, who I think technically is behind Anton, who Anton could have got. And then obviously if you watch the goal, the ball goes over the back, over the top of Benzbaini, and then Chabot just obviously taps it in.
It's actually a really good finish. It's more than a tap. He's
great.
For a big defender, he's hit
great
it really
finish.
well.
I mean, he had all the time in the world to perfect it.
Yeah. But like it's little things like that where you're right. It's obviously, just, I mean, you can argue that strikers and forwards and wingers will always do that because they just don't really like defending. But there's just no kind of, there was no discipline, or there was no one really taking charge in that situation to be like, there's 3 guys at the back post, or Benzbaini screaming at them not to run forward. And there was like a offside goal in the first half where I think Dortmund were actually really lucky. Was it Chabot? I think they maybe headed that one home as well, actually, which was ruled off. If you watch the highlights of that, Girassi is bursting a gut to keep him on side, and he actually tries to run around the front of him to head it, to almost intercept it with his own head. Again, no discipline whatsoever for anyone knowing what they're supposed to be doing there from that set piece. And then, like I said a moment ago, like I feel quite bad that Anton's the one who obviously was painted as the villain for this one, for the offside. For the own goal, because if you watch the way that Benzbaini just completely loses Furyk, he just gives up and then lets Furyk cut inside, and then the ball just obviously just hits off Anton. But Anton just looks around, and I understand the frustration he had because his fullbacks just walked away and left him exposed at the front post to try and deflect a shot, and it's just unfortunate there.
He did cut a very tragic figure, Valdemar Anton, must be said. I mentioned in the piece that I wrote, he was mercilessly booed and jeered by the Stuttgart fans with every touch of the ball. At first, it took me a second to clock on what they were booing at, and I was like, okay, every time the booing starts, it's when Valdemar Anton's on the ball. So that they've clearly not got any time for him whatsoever, and it went on all through the first half. And then the second half, it's continued, and what's he done? Right in front of those fans, he's gone and stuck it in the net.
Yeah,
I had to feel a little bit sorry for it.
They had their pick. They could have booed Kobel, they could have picked Anton, they could have booed Girassi. Half that Dortmund team's ex-Stuttgart.
Boo all of them. I don't want to jump on sort of Niko Kovac too much just yet. He's literally been in the door for a week. But again, there's just a little bit of disjointed thinking again in that Kovac, if he's known for anything, it's for, I suppose, producing teams which are pretty unspectacular, but at least defensively solid and well organised.
Yeah.
But that whatever he's done in the first week, and by all accounts, it was attacking football, and that's from the mouth of Sebastian Kehl. Kehl was asking, what are your first impressions, and he almost sort of attempted one of his press conferences in the week, attempted to almost dispel the myth around Niko Kovac as only being in inverted commas, like just a boring, defensive, quite unspectacular coach, and said, no, in training all this week, it's been attack, attacking football, really offensive-minded training sessions. And you think, okay, maybe it would be better if Niko Kovac did what he's, I suppose, stereotypically known for and good at, and stabilised that defence at the back, because the goals they conceded were very poor.
Well, I mean, that is exactly what we pointed out in the previous show, Stefan, that if Dortmund go out there and attack against the Stuttgart side, Stuttgart will say, thank you for the 3 points. And that's exactly what happened, because, to beat the Stuttgart side, I actually think that they are rightfully in and around the top 4 spot at the moment. This is a good team. They're still a good team. They're not as good as they were last year, which makes sense because there's been a lot of turnover. But I actually think that they pretty soon probably will be as good as they were last year because, slowly but surely, Sebastian Hoeneß, who is a good coach, has been able to integrate all these pieces. And this Stuttgart team, I thought for the entire 90 minutes was just head and shoulders above this Dortmund team. And the only way to beat the Stuttgart team as Borussia Dortmund was to get your defensive homework right. So I don't understand why they spend an entire week teaching attacking football if the opponent that comes to town, who you, by the way, haven't beaten in 5 games and you've lost the last 3, maybe...
Lost the last 5 now.
Lost the last 5.
5 in a row.
Across all competitions still, right?
Across all competitions. The last game that Dortmund didn't lose to Stuttgart was the 3-3, which cost them the title, arguably.
Yeah. So
I think
my point is that
sorry, man.
Kovac should have probably focused on defensive football here. I guess that's probably what you were going to say as well, Stefan.
Well, I was just going to take a moment to praise Stuttgart because we talked as we previewed this game, saying this is a game that Stuttgart might really struggle with because they've had such a arduous fixture list recently. They had the Pokal game in midweek, which Dortmund had the full week to train. Kovac had the full week to train these players. And the thing is, like, if you look at how many players each team are missing, Stuttgart are missing far more players than Dortmund are right now. Yes, Dortmund are missing Schlotterbeck, they're missing Mencha, and I know they're both technically first team players, but Stuttgart are still missing Zagadou, who's still a decent player for them, still missing Al-Dakhil, who I think is probably a starter for them in the full strength team. Brun Larsen, who's been great since he joined the club. Touré's been a really useful striker for them. Valdemata wasn't deemed fit enough to start this game. Wagnerman was on the bench. They also had who was the other one? Demirovic was on the bench. Undav didn't even look. I didn't even think Undav looked fully fit in this match. It was a Stuttgart team that was kind of put together with sellotape and blue tack, and they still managed to beat Dortmund. And I think the key thing is that there's a lot of lessons that Dortmund can take from Stuttgart as a sporting project. And I know Watzke will. If someone was to say it to Watzke, he'd probably just think we'll just buy a few more of the players, but they're completely missing the point. The point is that Stuttgart...
They've already sacked Sven Mislintat again, so...
Well, yeah, maybe. But the point is Stuttgart have 2 or 3 players for every position. So if Undav's not playing well, they've got Voltemata or Touré or whoever else, and Fulric and Leveling can take turns being that winger who's the out ball, and they've got 2 or 3 central defenders, they've got 2 or 3 central midfielders that can fill in and things like that as well. So that's the kind of genius to Stuttgart. They've got a good head coach, but he's got plenty of players to work with. Whereas at Dortmund, you feel like if they lose 3 or 4 players, the whole thing falls apart because there's just no depth in that team whatsoever. There's not enough strength in the first place. I don't think the start 11's good enough. But the other key thing is that if Schlotterbeck goes out, or if Mecha picks up an injury, or which will be another big thing now that Rierson's got that red card, they'll just be going from one chaotic performance to another because there's just not enough players in that starting 11, which is a crazy thing to think because they're like the 2nd or 3rd biggest wage budget in Germany, but they still don't even feel, it doesn't even feel like they have a proper 25-man squad from one week to the next.
Yeah, there's an awful lot they can learn, absolutely. And in fact, as I was walking up to my position, I was actually walking behind Lars Ricken and Fabian Wohlgemuth, who was in the Stuttgart sporting director. Couldn't quite get close enough to hear what they were saying, but if you're Lars Ricken in that situation, he's got to be asking for a few tips. How does this job work exactly? So next time,
job
next time I'll try and shadow them a little bit closer. Um, I made this point in the piece as well. I thought, just, again, to latch on to the praise for Sebastian Hoeneß. I thought for the second time in a month, I've sat at a Borussia Dortmund post-match press conference and listened to a visiting coach just come out and effectively say, "Yep, we knew what would happen. The plan just completely went off." Xabi Alonso did it at the in mid-Jan. About a minute after Nuri Sahin had been talking about how pleased he'd been with how much possession and how much midfield control Borussia Dortmund had against the German champions, one of the best teams in Europe, Xabi Alonso went, "Yeah, that was the plan." And they did just hit them on the brakes. Okay, well, Stuttgart wasn't quite 3 times in 9 minutes or whatever Leverkusen did to them, but it was the same sort of thing. You had Niko Kovac there, quite inexplicably, really, insisting that, I'm actually really happy with everything today except the result. And meanwhile, you've got Sebastian Hoeneß saying, "No, we've come off a really tough fixture list. The lads are tired. We didn't have a completely full squad. We knew we couldn't go head to head with them, so we thought we'll just give them the ball and hit them on the break." And it worked. So that's happened twice in a month now with 2 different coaches at Borussia Dortmund.
Because they know that Dortmund can't do anything with the ball.
Yeah, ultimately.
Right? And I mean that is a huge difference. That's a huge difference between a team like Stuttgart and Leverkusen, who probably have, in my opinion, the 2 best head coaches in German football at the moment. And those teams know what to do with the ball. And so they don't need the ball as much, because when they have the ball, they will do something proper with it. And I mean, I actually think this game could have been worse. You mentioned Dennis Undav. He loses that duel with Emre Can at the very start of the game. I can't remember the exact minute, but he breaks through, right? And Emre Can catches up with him.
He doesn't break through. It was a lazy pass back, which he lacked.
Sure, sure. But I bet Dennis Undav scores there, right? It wasn't like a heroic Emre Can performance. Oh, he caught Dennis Undav. He caught Dennis Undav because Dennis Undav has played like 150 games in the last 12 months, and literally there wasn't any more. Yeah. There was no more gasoline in the tank.
Undav also got his touch going round Kobel completely wrong. Yeah. Which, I mean, in fair, on balance, credit to Can for chasing back there. That was also Valdemar Anton's back pass as well. That would have been a really disastrous game for him if that had been the case. But yeah, there's an awful lot of work to do. We mentioned it in the chat, didn't we, after the game, that ultimately, this is, in the long term, it's not Niko Kovac's job to sort this out. He's in there to do a bit of, at least in the short term, do a bit of a firefighting job to get them back into contention for those Champions League places, which even now 6 points behind Stuttgart, the league is such, they're not completely out of it. The league is still close enough that somehow, thanks to the shortcomings of others, Dortmund are bizarrely still not completely out of that. And yeah, in the long term, it's not going to be down to Niko Kovac to sort all that out, to sort out the transfer policy, to sort out the squad building, to sort out the responsibilities within the hierarchy at Dortmund. That is now 100% on Lars Ricken and Sebastian Kehl. And we can't judge that after just a week of Niko Kovac in the building. But there's not much. They've not got much time in which to do that. Neither Kovac on the pitch. They're off to Lisbon this week for a playoff, which they could have avoided. That could have afforded them more time on the training pitch. And similarly, even off the pitch, Dortmund are going to go, as far as they're concerned, as far as they can in the Champions League, and then straight into a Club World Cup in the summer, which is a blessing and a curse for them. On the one hand, it's taking away a lot of time and attention from things that they could be sorting out. But on the other hand, it's providing them with a financial cushion, which could allow them potentially to survive 1 or 2 years missing out on the Champions League. Mm-hmm. They really are sort of balancing on a bit of a knife edge at the moment as to which way this goes.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually, because you could almost see it being a blessing for Dortmund if they did miss out in the top 4, and then they got into like Europa League, and they could just kind of take that with a degree of seriousness.
That's very much the tenor that I had an awful lot of people saying that really would not be the worst thing in the world, particularly because they got the financial cushion.
I don't think they're going to make the Europa League.
I think they will, because they and Leipzig haven't won a football game, it feels like, since August, and both of them are still within touching distance of Europe, and it's crazy.
Yeah,
They're only
but
6 points off Stuttgart, which is, if you think about the way that both these teams are playing this season, it's absolutely crazy.
Although I would back Stuttgart to be a lot better now that they've had their fun in the Champions League in the first half of the season. It's clearly taken a lot out of them, but you could tell that there was a bit of a weight lifted from Stuttgart
and I would say the same about Leipzig. They were better this weekend too. So Stuttgart and Leipzig can basically just focus on the league. I mean, Stuttgart are still in the German Cup, right? And so are Leipzig, but Leipzig have 2 more fixtures, potentially 3, right? Stuttgart are obviously already through to the semifinals, but it's a different beast, isn't it? Playing that extra game in the Pokal versus playing, 2 extra games, potentially 4 extra games.
It's a classic problem for Bundesliga clubs, because they do have smaller squads, particularly Borussia Dortmund. But that's also their own fault.
So I don't know. I think at the moment I look at the top 4, and I don't think Dortmund are better than Frankfurt, Leipzig, or Stuttgart. And one of them will miss out on the top 4 as well. So you know what I mean? Like that's a task, and that means that one of those 3 will end up in that Europa League spot, right? And Dortmund are not in the Pokal anymore, so that's not a passageway to reach the Europa League.
When you sort of war game it like that, it probably is the conclusion you come to, that who's going to drop out.
Conference League is fun.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, either way, like the point I was going to make was that them missing out in Europe, either through not qualifying at all or landing in a competition which they don't care about, could be a blessing for them, because it would give them the opportunity to literally sack half that squad. And we see this a lot of Bundesliga teams. They obviously do very well one season when they don't have European competition. Stuttgart, a perfect example of that. Frankfurt as well, from time to time. They do really, really well. They have a squad which is used to just playing 1 game a week. They get into rhythm. They work on their training every week, and then obviously the next season they get Champions League. Heidenheim, actually, there's another even better example. Dortmund, it almost feels like Dortmund need one of those seasons where they have nothing but the Bundesliga to focus on. But they have to
financially probably just about afford it as well.
Yeah, but they need that. They need that. They need to rebuild that squad. And Matt's right. There's all the reporting saying that Kell and Ricken have got I guess only 3 or 4 months now. The weird thing is, it says they've got till the summer to prove themselves, and I think, well, they can't do anything till the summer. So I mean, unless they can have all these deals lined up and present to Vats and say, here's the 6 guys we're going to sign on July 1st. I don't really know what they're expected to do between now and then. It's not like they're the guys out the training ground.
I mean, it also won't be, by all accounts, it theoretically won't be Vatska who's moving his thumb.
That's like saying Uli is no longer in Munich.
I know. Yeah.
I think Vatska's moved on to bigger and better things. He's more interested in the next Germany head coach, I would say, or appointing that guy in charge. But yeah, we'll see.
Well, you wanted the current Germany head coach to coach Dortmund. See how that worked out. It's Dortmund. I think is going to be a story that is going to dominate this podcast for a little longer.